What if I told you that there is a woman so honored, so beloved, so uniquely chosen, that an entire chapter of the Quran carries her name, and hers alone? Not the name of a prophet, not the name of a king, not the name of a battle or a nation, but the name of a woman. A woman who never held a sword, never ruled an empire, never wrote a book. And yet her story has echoed across 14 centuries, whispered in every corner of the earth, recited in prayers 5 times a day by billions of people who were not even born when she walked this earth. Her name is Maryam. You may know her as Mary. And today we are not just going to tell her story. We are going to uncover the secret wisdom hidden inside it, the lessons she left behind for those who are willing to look closely enough to see them. Because if you have ever felt alone in a crowd, judged before you could explain yourself, tested beyond what you thought you could bear, or unsure of what tomorrow holds, this story was written for you too. Stay with me until the end, because the final lesson of Maryam's life is the one most people never notice. And it might just change the way you see your own struggles forever. Let us begin not with Maryam herself, but with her mother. Because to understand the chosen one, you must first understand the prayer that brought her into existence. Her mother's name was Hannah, the wife of Imran, a righteous and honored family. Hannah had longed for a child for years, and when she finally conceived, she made a vow to God, a vow so complete, so total, that it tells us everything about the household Maryam was born into. She vowed that whatever was in her womb would be dedicated entirely to the service of the divine, set apart from the ordinary concerns of the world, devoted to worship and to the sacred space of the temple. She expected a son. In that time and place, sons were the ones who would serve in the temple. Sons were the ones who carried honor forward. But when the child was born, it was a daughter. And here is the first lesson hidden in this story, so early that most people rush past it without noticing. Hannah did not despair. She did not see her daughter as a lesser gift. Instead, she said words that are recorded for all time, that the male she had hoped for is not like the female she was blessed with. She named her Maryam. And then she asked God to protect this child and her future children from every evil, from every whisper of temptation, seeking refuge for her in the protection of the divine itself. Think about what this means. Before Maryam ever took a single breath on her own, before she ever spoke a word, before she ever faced a single trial, she was already wrapped in prayer. She was already covered in her mother's trust in God's wisdom, even when that wisdom did not match human expectation. This is the first secret lesson of Maryam's life. And it is one we often forget. Sometimes what looks like a disappointment, what looks like the opposite of what you asked for, what looks like an unexpected turn, is actually the very thing that will become the greatest honor of your life. Hannah asked for a son to serve God. She received a daughter who would become the mother of a prophet, the only woman named directly in the entire Quran. The woman held up as an example for all of mankind, male and female, for the rest of human history. If Hannah had allowed her disappointment to define her response, if she had seen only what was missing instead of trusting what was given, imagine what might have been lost. The lesson here is patience with the difference between what you plan and what you are given. Because sometimes the plan you did not choose is the one written by a wisdom greater than your own. Maryam was raised in the temple, under the guardianship of her relative, the prophet Zachariah, peace be upon him. And this is where the story begins to reveal something even deeper. Zachariah would enter her private chamber of worship, and he would find her provided with food, food that had not come from him, food that had not come from any human hand that he could trace. When he asked her where this provision came from, she answered with a simple, profound statement, that it comes from God, and that God provides for whoever he wills without any limit, without any measure that human beings can calculate or predict. Pause on this for a moment, because there is enormous wisdom folded into this small exchange. Maryam was not surrounded by wealth. She was not surrounded by family members who could shower her with luxury. She was in many ways isolated, dedicated to a life of worship, separated from the normal comforts that a young girl might expect. And yet, in that very isolation, she experienced a kind of provision that could not be explained by ordinary means. This teaches us something that so many people spend their entire lives trying to understand, that the fear of being alone, the fear of being without support, the fear of scarcity, none of it accounts for the ways that provision can arrive when you least expect it. Through means you cannot trace, in a manner that defies your own calculations. Maryam's chamber becomes a symbol. It is not just a room in a temple. It is a metaphor for every quiet, hidden corner of struggle in your own life, where you have wondered how you would make it through, and somehow you did. Somehow, help came. Somehow the next meal appeared, the next opportunity opened. The next door unlocked itself when you had already accepted that it would remain closed. This is the second secret lesson. Provision does not always come from where you expect it. Sometimes the very isolation that feels like abandonment is actually the space in which the most extraordinary support is quietly being arranged for you unseen until the moment it is revealed. Now let us move to the moment that changes everything. The moment that history remembers, that scripture immortalizes, that art across centuries has tried and failed to fully capture. Maryam withdrew to a place east of her family, seeking privacy, seeking distance, placing a screen between herself and the rest of the world. And it was there, in that solitude, that an angel appeared before her in the form of a man, complete in every proportion, standing before her without warning. Her first response was not curiosity. It was not calm acceptance. It was fear, a deep instinctive fear. The fear of a woman who values her purity and her honor above all else, suddenly confronted by an unknown man in a place where she believed herself entirely alone. She cried out, seeking refuge in God from this stranger, telling him directly that if he had any fear of God at all, he should leave her be. And here the angel spoke the words that would change the course of human history, that he was only a messenger from her Lord, sent to give her news of a pure son. Now imagine, truly imagine, what this moment must have felt like from the inside. You are a woman who has dedicated your entire existence to purity, to devotion, to a life free from the touch of any man. You have guarded yourself with a level of discipline that most people could never sustain. And suddenly, you are told that you will bear a child conceived without any human father, a child that will defy every law of nature you have ever known, a child whose very existence will require the world to either believe you or condemn you. Maryam's response is one of the most human moments in the entire story, and it is exactly why her story resonates so deeply. She did not simply accept this news with silent submission. She questioned it. She asked how this could possibly happen when no man had touched her, when she had not been unchaste. This is not a lack of faith, this is honesty. This is a soul grappling with news that defies every category of understanding she possessed. And the angel's response carries the third great secret lesson of this story, that it is easy for her Lord, and that this matter has already been decreed. Sit with that phrase for a moment. It is easy for your Lord. How many times in your own life have you faced a situation that felt impossible, a diagnosis that felt like a death sentence, a debt that felt like it would never be paid off, a relationship that felt permanently broken, a dream that felt entirely out of reach, and you asked, almost exactly like Maryam asked, how can this possibly happen? The answer given to her is the same answer available to every single person who has ever faced the impossible. It is easy for your Lord. The difficulty you perceive is a limitation of your own understanding, not a limitation of what is actually possible. Maryam's pregnancy, miraculous, unprecedented, defying biology itself, stands as the ultimate symbol that nothing is outside the reach of what can be arranged for those who are chosen, those who are patient, those who trust even when they do not fully understand. But notice something crucial here, because this is where so many retellings of this story lose the deeper wisdom. Maryam was not given an easy path after receiving this news. The angel did not promise her comfort. He did not promise her that people would believe her, that her family would embrace her, that society would understand. He simply promised her that the matter was decreed, that it would happen, that it was easy for God to accomplish. What happened next in her life was not miraculous ease. It was profound difficulty, carried with miraculous grace. This distinction matters more than almost anything else in this entire story. Being chosen does not mean being spared from hardship. Being chosen means being equipped to carry hardship in a way that transforms it into something sacred. As her pregnancy progressed, Maryam withdrew to a remote place, away from her people. Imagine the isolation of this moment. She was young, she was unmarried, she was visibly pregnant in a society where this would be seen as the gravest possible scandal, an accusation that could destroy her reputation, her family's honor, and potentially her very life. She had no husband to explain this to the world. She had no way to prove what had happened to her, because what happened to her defied every natural explanation available to the people around her. She carried this secret, this miracle, this overwhelming reality entirely alone. There is a scene that unfolds next that has been recited, reflected upon, and wept over for centuries. The pains of childbirth came upon her, and she was driven by that pain to the trunk of a palm tree. And in her exhaustion, in her fear, in the isolation of that moment, she cried out words that reveal the depth of human vulnerability even within the chosen. She wished she had died before this, and been forgotten, completely forgotten, as if she had never existed at all. This is perhaps the most important moment in the entire narrative, and it is the one that so many people misunderstand or skip past too quickly. This is a woman chosen above all the women of creation, a woman visited by an angel, a woman carrying a miracle within her, and in her moment of greatest physical and emotional pain, she wished for annihilation. She wished to disappear. This is not weakness. This is not a failure of faith. This is the raw, honest reality of what it means to be human, even while being chosen for something extraordinary. Miriam's cry beneath that palm tree gives permission to every single person who has ever felt overwhelmed, who has ever wished to disappear under the weight of their circumstances, who has ever felt that their pain was too much to bear even while trying to hold on to their faith. It tells us that sainthood, that being chosen, that carrying a divine purpose, none of it erases the reality of human suffering. It simply means that suffering is not the end of the story. And it wasn't the end of her story either. Because immediately after this cry of despair, something remarkable happens. A voice calls out to her from beneath her, telling her not to grieve, that her Lord has provided a stream beneath her. And then she is told to shake the trunk of the palm tree toward herself, and it will drop upon her fresh, ripe dates. Think about the specific nature of this provision. She did not simply receive food and water delivered to her by some outside force. She was told to shake the tree herself. She had to participate in her own provision. She had to reach out, exhausted as she was, and take physical action to bring down what had been provided for her. This is the fourth secret lesson of Maryam's story, and it is one of the most practical and powerful lessons for anyone facing hardship today. Divine provision does not always arrive without effort on your part. Sometimes the stream is already flowing beneath you. Sometimes the dates are already ripe above you, but you are still asked to shake the tree. You are still asked to move, to act, to participate in the unfolding of what has already been prepared for you. Faith is not passive waiting. Faith is often the courage to reach out and shake the tree, even when you feel you have nothing left to give. And then comes the instruction that carries within it the fifth and perhaps most profound lesson of this entire story. She is told that if she sees any human being, she should say that she has vowed a fast of silence to the Most Merciful, and that she will not speak to any person that day. Let this sink in. Maryam is about to walk back into a community carrying a newborn child, with no husband, no explanation that any ordinary person would accept, no defense that would satisfy the accusations that were certainly coming. And she is instructed to say nothing at all, not because she has no defense. Her defense was the truth itself, the most extraordinary truth in human history, but because she is told to let silence be her answer, and to let the miracle itself speak in her place. This is one of the deepest wells of wisdom in the entire narrative, and it is something so many of us struggle with throughout our entire lives. When you are wronged, when you are misunderstood, when accusations are thrown at you that you know are unfair or incomplete, the instinct is almost always to defend yourself immediately, loudly, exhaustively. We want to explain, we want to justify, we want everyone to understand our side of the story right away. But Maryam's story teaches something entirely different. It teaches that there is a time for silence, a time to trust that truth does not always need your voice to defend it, a time to let events unfold and let the proof reveal itself, rather than exhausting yourself trying to convince people who may not be ready to believe you anyway. And this is exactly what happened. When she returned to her people carrying the infant, they came to her with harsh words, accusing her directly, telling her she had done something monstrous, invoking the righteousness of her family lineage as if to say, how could someone from such a noble family fall into such disgrace? This is the cruelty of judgment, the cruelty of a society that sees only the surface of a situation and assumes the worst, without patience, without curiosity, without the humility to consider that there might be a deeper truth they cannot yet perceive. And Maryam, true to the instruction she had been given, did not speak a single word in her own defense. Instead, she simply pointed to the child. Imagine the confusion, even the mockery, in the eyes of the people around her in that moment. They asked her, with clear disbelief, how they were supposed to speak to a child who was still in the cradle, still an infant, incapable of speech by every natural law they understood. And then the miracle unfolded. The infant himself spoke. He declared that he was a servant of God, given scripture and made a prophet, blessed wherever he may be, commanded to prayer and charity as long as he lived, devoted to his mother, not made arrogant or wretched. And that peace was upon him the day he was born, the day he would die, and the day he would be raised alive again. Consider what just happened here. Maryam's entire defense, her entire vindication, came not from her own words but from the miracle that had been placed directly in her arms. She trusted the process. She trusted the silence. She trusted that what had been decreed for her would reveal itself in its own perfect timing. And it did. in a way far more powerful than any argument she could have constructed herself. This is the wisdom that so many of us need in our own lives, especially in a world where everyone feels the pressure to constantly defend themselves, to constantly perform their innocence, to constantly prove their worth to people who have already decided not to believe them. Maryam's story teaches that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is not louder words but deeper trust. Trust that the truth, given enough time and enough faith, has a way of revealing itself that no human argument could ever match. Now let us step back and look at the larger architecture of Maryam's life, because there is a pattern here that reveals itself only when you view the whole story together, rather than as isolated events. Every single major moment in her life involved a test that seemed, on the surface, to be a burden, and every single one of those burdens became the very thing that elevated her status. Being born a daughter instead of the expected son became the reason she was set apart for a unique and unmatched honor. Being isolated in the temple, seemingly cut off from the comforts of ordinary life, became the space in which she experienced provision beyond human explanation. Being visited by an angel with news that defied everything she understood about her own body and her own future became the moment that placed her in the company of only a handful of individuals in all of human history who received direct angelic communication. Carrying a pregnancy that would appear scandalous to everyone around her became the very vessel through which a prophet entered the world. And enduring the pain of childbirth utterly alone, crying out in a moment of complete despair, became the setting for a miracle of provision that still moves people to tears today. Do you see the pattern? Every trial in Maryam's story was not a detour from her purpose. It was the exact path her purpose required her to walk. This is perhaps the single most important secret wisdom embedded in her entire narrative, that what looks like an obstacle is very often the road itself, not a deviation from it. We spend so much of our lives waiting for our trials to end so that our real life, our real purpose, can finally begin. Maryam's story tells us something radically different. It tells us that the trial itself may be the very mechanism through which your purpose is being formed, refined, and revealed. The isolation was not separate from her honor. It was the incubator of it. Let's talk now about her unique status, because this is something that deserves far more attention than it usually receives. Maryam is the only woman mentioned by her actual name in the entire Quran. Other righteous and significant women are referenced by their relationships, as someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's sister, but Maryam is named directly, repeatedly, throughout the text. An entire chapter carries her name. Her story is told not once but referenced across multiple chapters, weaving her narrative into the larger tapestry of prophetic history alongside towering figures like Ibrahim, Musa, and Isa himself. She stands not as a supporting character in someone else's story, but as the central figure of her own account. Beyond this, she is described in terms reserved for only the most elevated souls in all of creation, chosen and purified above the women of all the worlds. Consider the magnitude of that description. Above the women of all the worlds, not just her generation, not just her nation, not just women of a particular era, all the worlds, across all of time. This is a status that very few human beings, male or female, are ever described as holding. And yet, here is the sixth secret lesson, one that is easy to overlook amid the grandeur of these descriptions. Her elevation was never about worldly status. She was not a queen. She was not wealthy. She was not surrounded by armies or advisors or palaces. She was, by every worldly measure, an ordinary woman facing extraordinarily difficult circumstances, often alone, often without material support, often misunderstood by the very community she belonged to. Her greatness was built entirely on the foundation of her devotion, her patience, her trust, and her submission to a wisdom greater than her own understanding. This tells us something essential about how true honor is actually measured. It is not measured by comfort. It is not measured by how many people understand or support you. It is not measured by how smoothly your life unfolds. It is measured by the depth of your trust, when everything around you gives you reason to doubt, and by the integrity you maintain when no one is there to witness it, but the one who matters most. There is another layer to this story that deserves careful attention: the relationship between Maryam and her guardian, Zachariah. When Zachariah witnessed the extraordinary provision that came to Maryam in her private chamber of worship, something shifted within him. Seeing the reality of what could be provided to someone through sincere devotion, he was moved to make his own prayer, a prayer for a child of his own, despite his old age and despite his wife's inability to conceive. And that prayer was answered with the birth of Yahya, a prophet in his own right. This is such a beautiful and often overlooked thread in the story. Maryam's devotion did not only transform her own life, It became a source of inspiration and renewed hope for someone else entirely. Watching her faith in action reignited faith within the heart of an aging prophet who had almost given up hope of ever having a child. This is the seventh secret lesson: your quiet devotion, your private faith. The small acts of trust that you think no one is paying attention to can become the spark that revives hope in someone else's heart, even without you ever knowing it. Maryam never set out to inspire Zachariah. She was simply living her devotion authentically, in the privacy of her own worship. And that authenticity rippled outward in ways she likely never fully realized during her own lifetime. Let us now turn to something that is often missed entirely in popular retellings of this story: the way Maryam is positioned explicitly as an example not just for women, but for all of humanity, men and women alike. This is stated directly. She is not held up as a model exclusively for women to emulate in matters specific to womanhood. She is held up as an example for all who believe, regardless of gender, regardless of era, regardless of circumstance. This matters immensely because it tells us that the lessons of her life, trust in the face of the impossible, patience in the face of pain, dignity in the face of false accusation, silence in the face of injustice, devotion in the face of isolation. These are not lessons limited to one segment of humanity. They are universal lessons, meant for every soul that will ever walk this earth and face its own version of an impossible situation. Now, let's talk about fear, because fear runs like a thread through the entire narrative. And understanding how Maryam moved through her fear rather than being paralyzed by it is one of the most valuable lessons available to us. Her first reaction to the angel was fear. Her cry beneath the palm tree came from a place of overwhelming fear and despair. Her walk back into her community, carrying a child she could not fully explain, must have been soaked in fear of rejection, fear of violence, fear of permanent disgrace. Maryam was not fearless. She was not someone who moved through her trials without ever feeling the full weight of dread and uncertainty. What made her exceptional was not the absence of fear, but her ability to keep moving forward, to keep trusting, to keep taking the next step even while that fear was present within her. This is the eighth secret lesson, and it might be the one that most directly applies to your life today. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you are facing right now, you do not need to eliminate your fear before you can be chosen for something extraordinary. You do not need to feel completely calm, completely confident, completely certain before you take the next step that has been placed in front of you. Maryam felt fear, and she still walked forward. She felt despair, and she still reached up to shake the tree. She felt the dread of judgment, and she still walked back into her community carrying the truth, even without words to defend it. Courage, real courage, the kind that shapes history, is not the absence of fear. It is action taken despite its presence. Let's also examine the theme of solitude more closely, because it appears again and again throughout her story, almost as if it is a deliberate design rather than a coincidence. She withdrew to a place away from her family before the angel appeared. She withdrew to a remote place during her pregnancy. She gave birth entirely alone, beneath a palm tree, with no midwife, no family member, no community support of any kind. Every single pivotal moment of transformation in her life happened while she was physically alone. This is worth sitting with, because in our modern world, we are taught to fear solitude. We fill every silent moment with noise, with distraction, with constant connection to other people through our devices and our routines. We are told that being alone means being unsupported, that isolation is something to be avoided at almost any cost. But Maryam's story offers a radically different perspective. It suggests that solitude is often the very space in which the deepest transformations occur. It is in solitude that she received the angel's message. It is in solitude that she experienced the miraculous provision of the stream and the dates. It is in solitude that the infant Isa spoke his first words, defending his mother in a way no other voice could have. The ninth secret lesson of this story is this: do not fear the seasons of solitude that life places you in. They are not always a punishment. They are, quite often, sacred spaces of preparation, provision, and revelation that could not have unfolded in the middle of a crowd. There is also something profoundly important in the way Maryam is portrayed in relation to her own agencies throughout this story. Even while being guided by angelic communication, even while events unfolded that were entirely beyond her control, she is never portrayed as a passive figure. She questioned the angel. She expressed her fear openly. She cried out in her pain without pretending to feel strength she did not have. She physically shook the tree when instructed. She made the choice to observe silence and point to her child rather than exhausting herself in verbal defense. Every step of her story shows a woman who, even within circumstances almost entirely outside her control, still exercised her own will, her own voice, her own choices within the boundaries of what she had been given. This distinction matters enormously because it teaches the 10th secret lesson of Maryam's story. Being chosen, being guided, being placed within a larger plan that you did not design yourself does not mean surrendering your own agency entirely. Maryam remained an active participant in her own story at every stage. She was not simply swept along by fate with no will of her own. She engaged with what was happening to her. She questioned it, she felt it fully, and she made deliberate choices about how to respond to it. This is the model for how we too should move through the parts of our lives that feel guided by forces beyond our control. We can trust the larger plan while still actively participating in how we respond to each moment within it. Let's return, one more time, to the moment beneath the palm tree, because there is a detail in that scene that deserves even deeper reflection than we have given it so far. The voice that called out to her, telling her not to grieve, came from beneath her. Some understand this to refer to the newborn child himself, others to the angel. But in either interpretation, comfort arrived from an unexpected direction, from below, from a source she likely was not looking toward in her moment of despair. How often in our own lives do we look upward, outward, toward the obvious sources of help, while the actual comfort we need is arriving from a direction we never thought to check? Sometimes the support you need is not going to come from the person you expected, the source you were counting on, the plan you had already mapped out in your mind. Sometimes it rises up from beneath you, from the very ground you thought was empty, from the place you had already written off as having nothing left to offer. Now, let's talk about time. Because Maryam's story also contains a profound lesson about the nature of divine timing versus human timing. The angel told her that this matter had already been decreed. This means that before she ever questioned how it could happen, before she ever felt fear, before she ever cried out in pain, it had already been settled, already written, already prepared. Her fear, her questions, her pain, none of it altered what had already been decreed. It simply became the human experience of walking through something that was, in a sense, already complete before it even began to unfold in front of her. This offers an enormous comfort to anyone who has ever felt like their anxiety, their fear, their uncertainty somehow threatens the outcome they are hoping for. Maryam's fear did not stop the angel's message from being true. Her despair beneath the palm tree did not stop the stream from flowing or the dates from falling. Her walk into her community, heavy with dread, did not stop the infant from speaking in her defense. What was decreed unfolded regardless of the emotional storm she was experiencing internally. This is the 11th secret lesson. Your fear and your faith can exist simultaneously, and neither one negates what has already been written for you. You do not have to achieve perfect calm before good things are allowed to happen to you. You are allowed to be afraid and still be held. There is one more thread of this story that deserves to be pulled all the way to the surface, because it is perhaps the most quietly radical lesson of all. The way Maryam's honor was built entirely independent of a husband, independent of a traditional family structure, independent of the social validations that her society, and honestly most societies throughout history, have used to measure a woman's worth. She became the mother of a prophet without a husband. She achieved a station described as elevated above all the women of creation, without the social scaffolding that would normally be expected to accompany such honor. Her worth, in the eyes of the divine, was never contingent on the approval of the people around her. This is an extraordinarily powerful message, and it extends far beyond questions of gender or marriage. It speaks to anyone who has ever felt that their worth is dependent on external validation, on having the right relationship status, the right career, the right family structure, the right approval from the people around them before they can be considered valuable, honored, or chosen for something meaningful. Maryam's story dismantles this entirely. Her honor came from her devotion, her patience, her trust, and her submission to a wisdom greater than the expectations of her society, not from meeting any checklist that the world around her had constructed. This is the 12th secret lesson, and it might be the one that liberates the most people who hear this story. Your worth is not measured by the boxes society expects you to check. It is measured by the sincerity of your devotion and the depth of your trust, regardless of how your life looks from the outside. Now, let us bring all of these threads together, because there is a final layer to this story that we have been building toward this entire time, and it is the lesson that ties every other lesson into a single, unified truth. Maryam's entire life, from the unexpected disappointment of her birth as a daughter instead of a son, to the isolation of the temple, to the fear of the angel's visitation, to the despair beneath the palm tree, to the silent walk back into a judgmental community. Every single one of these moments looks, on its own, like hardship. Looked at individually, each moment could easily be mistaken for a tragedy, a setback, an unfair burden placed on an innocent woman. But when you step back and view the entire arc of her story as one continuous narrative, you see something entirely different. You see that every single one of those hardships was actually a thread being woven into something magnificent, a life so honored that it would be remembered, recited, and revered for the rest of human history. This is the final secret wisdom of Maryam's story, the one I promised you at the very beginning. The hardships in your own life are not necessarily interruptions to your purpose. They may very well be the exact material your purpose is being built from. You cannot always see this while you are inside the difficulty. Maryam certainly could not see it while she was crying beneath that palm tree, wishing she had never existed at all. In that moment, she had no way of knowing that her story would become one of the most honored narratives in human history, that her name would be spoken in prayer by billions of people across 14 centuries, that an entire chapter of scripture would carry her name forever. All she had in that moment was her pain, her fear, and her trust. And it turned out that trust was enough, not because it erased her pain, but because it carried her through it, all the way to a station of honor she could never have imagined for herself while she was living inside the difficulty of it. Let us also spend a moment on the way this story treats the passage of time itself, because it is easy to read a narrative like this quickly, moving from one dramatic scene to the next, without pausing to consider how long these seasons of waiting actually were for the woman living through them. The dedication in the temple was not a single afternoon of devotion. It was years of quiet, consistent worship, unnoticed by the wider world, unremarked upon by history, until the moment Zachariah discovered the provision in her chamber. The pregnancy was not resolved in an instant. It was months of carrying a secret that could not be explained, months of wondering how her community would react, months of physical and emotional weight carried largely in silence. Even the most miraculous moments in her story were preceded by long, unglamorous stretches of ordinary time, during which nothing appeared to be happening at all. This is worth naming directly, because so many of us measure our own lives against the highlight reel of other people's stories, forgetting that even the most extraordinary lives are made up mostly of quiet, uneventful days that do not feel significant while they are being lived. Maryam's years in the temple were not filled with visions and miracles every single day. They were filled with ordinary devotion, repeated faithfully, day after day, without any guarantee of what it would eventually lead to. The miracle came later. The provision came later. The angel came later. What came first, and what came for the longest stretch of time, was simply consistency, showing up to her devotion again and again, long before she had any evidence of where that devotion would lead her. This offers a lesson that is easy to state, but hard to actually live. The extraordinary moments of a life are almost always built on a foundation of unremarkable, faithful repetition that no one is watching and no one is applauding. If you are in a season of your life that feels quiet, uneventful, even invisible, a season where you are simply showing up, doing the next right thing, praying the same prayers, doing the same work, without any dramatic sign that it is leading anywhere, Maryam's years in that temple chamber tell you that this is not wasted time. This is the time in which the foundation is being laid, quietly, patiently, for whatever is coming next. There is also something worth noting about how Maryam's story treats the question of being misunderstood, because this is a wound that so many people carry throughout their entire lives without ever finding language for it. To be misunderstood by people who are supposed to know you, supposed to love you, supposed to give you the benefit of the doubt, this is one of the most quietly devastating experiences a person can go through. Maryam's own community, the very people who should have known her character, who should have understood the kind of woman she had always been, still turned on her the moment circumstances appeared to condemn her. They invoked her family's righteous reputation, almost as an accusation, as if her apparent fall from grace was even more shocking, even more unforgivable, because of the good name she came from. This is a particular kind of pain, being judged not in spite of your good reputation but almost because of it. As though people expect more perfection from those who have shown goodness before, and are quicker to condemn any perceived failure, precisely because it contradicts the image they had built of you in their minds. And yet Maryam did not attempt to manage their perception of her. She did not scramble to preserve her reputation through her own words. She let her actions, her silence, and ultimately the miracle itself speak on her behalf. This is a difficult teaching to fully absorb in a world that constantly pressures us to control our image, to manage how others perceive us, to correct every misunderstanding the moment it arises. Maryam's example suggests a different, quieter kind of strength, the willingness to be misunderstood for a time, trusting that a fuller truth will eventually make itself known, rather than exhausting your entire spirit, trying to control what other people believe about you in every single moment. It is also worth reflecting on how this story treats motherhood itself, because Miriam's motherhood begins under circumstances that no mother would ever choose: isolation, fear, physical pain endured without support, a return to community that offered accusation instead of comfort. And yet, from this beginning, emerged a bond so significant that it is written into Scripture itself, referenced in the very first words her infant son spoke, declaring that he had been made devoted to his mother, not made arrogant or wretched toward her. Even in the most miraculous circumstances imaginable, the ordinary, tender bond between a mother and her child remains central to the story. This tells us that no matter how difficult the circumstances surrounding a beginning may be, the relationships built afterward can still carry immense tenderness, devotion, and honor. The difficulty of the beginning does not have to define the character of what follows. Consider, too, the way this story treats vindication, not as something Maryam had to fight for, argue for, or campaign for, but as something that arrived in its own perfect timing, through means she could never have orchestrated herself. She could not have made an infant speak through her own effort or persuasion. That vindication belonged entirely to a wisdom beyond her own capability. This distinction matters because so many of us exhaust ourselves trying to manufacture our own vindication, trying to force other people to see the truth on our own timeline, through our own effort, by our own words alone. Maryam's story suggests that some forms of vindication are simply not ours to produce. They arrive when they are meant to arrive, through means we could never have designed ourselves, and our task in the meantime is not to force the outcome but to remain faithful, patient, and dignified while we wait for it to unfold. One last thread deserves our attention before we close this reflection, and it concerns the way Maryam's story refuses to separate the spiritual from the physical, the sacred from the deeply human. This is a woman who is described in the most exalted terms possible, chosen and purified above the women of all the worlds, and yet the story does not shy away from showing us her hunger, her thirst, her exhaustion, her pain, her fear, even her wish to disappear entirely beneath the weight of what she was carrying. There is no attempt to sanitize her experience into something distant, untouchable, or superhuman. She eats dates because she is hungry. She drinks from the stream because she is thirsty. She cries out beneath the tree because the pain is real and overwhelming. This matters enormously, because it means the honor she achieved was not built by transcending her humanity, but by living through it fully, honestly, and faithfully. She did not have to pretend to be unaffected by her circumstances in order to be worthy of the station she was given. She simply had to keep trusting, keep moving, keep showing up to what was asked of her, even while every human emotion she carried remained fully present and fully felt. This is perhaps the gentlest and most freeing lesson of all the ones we have uncovered today. You do not have to appear strong in order to actually be strong. You do not have to hide your exhaustion, your fear, or your moments of despair in order to remain worthy of whatever honor may be waiting for you further down your own path. Maryam wept beneath that tree. Maryam questioned the angel. Maryam wished in her most vulnerable moment that she had never existed at all, and none of that disqualified her from becoming one of the most honored figures in all of human history. If anything, it is precisely because her story includes this raw honesty that it continues to comfort and inspire people across every generation, every background, every kind of hardship imaginable. Her humanity is not a flaw hidden beneath her honor. It is woven directly into the honor itself. So here is the question I want to leave you with. The same question this entire story has been quietly asking since the moment we began. What if the difficulty you are facing right now, the isolation, the uncertainty, the fear, the judgment of people who do not understand your situation, the exhaustion of carrying something no one else can fully see, what if this difficulty is not a detour from your purpose, but the very road your purpose requires you to walk? What if the silence you have been asked to hold is not weakness, but wisdom? What if the tree you have been told to shake, exhausted as you are, is standing directly above a provision that has already been prepared for you, waiting only for you to reach up and take it? Maryam's story does not promise an easy life to those who trust deeply. It promises something far more valuable, that trust, even trembling, even accompanied by fear, even soaked in tears beneath a lonely tree, has the power to carry you to a station of honor you cannot yet imagine from where you are standing today. Her wisdom was never loud, it was never demanding, it was quiet, patient, dignified, and unshakably rooted in trust. And that is perhaps the greatest secret of all, that the chosen ones are rarely chosen because their path was easy. They are chosen because, even when the path was almost unbearable, they never let go of their trust in the one who had already written the ending, long before they ever saw it unfold. If this story moved you even a fraction as much as it has moved generations before you, carry its lessons with you the next time your own path feels impossibly heavy, because somewhere beneath you, a stream may already be flowing, and somewhere above you, the tree may already be ready to be shaken.